Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into one of the most dramatic, frankly mind-boggling demographic shifts in North American history. We're going to explore the real story behind this evolution, zooming in on this fascinating little window of time between 1896 and 1914, when the very fabric of Canada was fundamentally transformed. All right, let's get right into it.
To really set the scene here, and to help you appreciate the sheer scale of what we're talking about, we've got to look at the numbers. Back in 1896, Canada's population sat at just over 5 million people. Now, for a country with such massive continent-spanning geography, that is incredibly sparse. It was basically empty space.
But in less than 2 decades, by 1914, that number absolutely exploded to nearly 8 million. We are talking about millions of new arrivals pouring into the country in an incredibly condensed time frame. I mean, it was one of the largest and most rapid emigration booms in the nation's entire history.
So, that brings us to a crucial question. How exactly did a country grow so incredibly fast? What kind of engine was driving this massive influx of human life? And, maybe more importantly, what is the human story behind this evolution? Because, something like this doesn't just happen by accident.
To uncover all of this, we're going to look at Canada's rapid population evolution, the architect of the boom, the pull, selling the dream, the push, fleeing Europe, and finally, the long journey west.
Section 1. Canada's rapid population evolution. Let's start by figuring out exactly why Canada suddenly needed so many people right at the turn of the century. What was the economic driving force here?
Well, it basically all came down to wheat and land. In the 1890s, there was this massive, skyrocketing global demand for wheat exports, and the Canadian prairies, they were seen as the perfect, vast canvas to plant all these new crops. But there was a major catch. The government desperately needed experienced farmers to actually cultivate this huge, often really unforgiving land.
So to understand how they managed to get millions of farmers out there, historians look at a classic model. It's called pull factors versus push factors. Pull factors are the prosperous opportunities. Think things like free land that draw migrants in. Push factors, on the other hand, are the harsh conditions like poverty or persecution that drive people away from their homelands. And to get a boom of this magnitude, you absolutely need both.
Moving to Section 2, the architect of the boom. The mastermind responsible for creating these Canadian pull factors was a guy named Clifford Sifton. He was the Minister of the Interior from 1896 to 1905.
And what's really fascinating here is Sifton's mindset. Before him, the government had mostly targeted British and American immigrants. But Sifton, he made a highly controversial departure from that. He argued that, honestly, a tradesman from a British city just wouldn't survive a brutal prairie winter. Instead, he wanted Eastern and Central European farmers. As he famously put it, he believed a stalwart peasant in a sheepskin coat born on the soil is good quality. Essentially, he didn't care about their nationality. He cared about their grit and their ability to survive.
Section 3. The pull. Selling the dream. So having identified exactly who he wanted, how did Sifton actually pull these specific immigrant groups across an entire ocean? I mean, he had to convince them to leave absolutely everything behind.
Well, he did it by launching a ridiculously aggressive marketing campaign. Just take a look at this 1893 immigration poster. It promises free farms for the million, specifically 160 acres of free land. Now, to a European peasant who was used to farming a tiny, exhausted sliver of dirt, 160 acres? That sounded like a kingdom. It was pure, brilliant visual propaganda, designed to spark a dream of limitless prosperity.
But Sifton didn't stop at posters. He basically ran what we would consider a 19th century global influencer campaign. He built massive Canadian exhibits at European fairs, plastered newspaper ads everywhere, and distributed translated pamphlets filled with glowing testimonials. He even hired traveling agents to go from village to village in Europe, just hyping up the boundless Canadian opportunity.
And the pull wasn't solely for farmers either. Canada's rapidly growing cities desperately needed labor too. So targeted campaigns drew in over 115,000 women from Britain and Europe seeking vital work. As this 1908 cablegram clearly advertises, Canada wants domestic servants, promising high wages and a healthy climate to draw them in. Section 4. The push. Fleeing Europe. Because, as effective as Sifton's marketing was, the Canadian dream was really only half the equation. The other half was the absolute nightmare that so many were desperately trying to escape.
For many, the primary push factor was simply survival.
Just listen to the words of Mary Solmik, a Ukrainian Canadian whose family emigrated back in 1899. She wrote, "It was poverty that compelled them to abandon their native land and sail across the ocean. High taxes and tiny, unproductive plots of land in Europe meant that Sifton's offer of 160 free acres wasn't just a business opportunity for them, it was quite literally a lifeline."
For others, the push was intense, violent persecution. Take a look at this poignant painting, Burning of Arms. It depicts a group of Russian farmers known as the Doukhobors in 1895. Here they are, setting fire to their weapons in a powerful, dangerous act of defiance against the Russian government, which was actively trying to force them into military service. You see, the Doukhobors were strict pacifists. To them, war and violence were fundamentally opposed to their deepest beliefs. And because they flat out refused to fight, they faced horrific beatings, imprisonment, and exile in Russia. That intense oppression pushed over 7,500 Doukhobors to flee to Canada in a single year, 1899, seeking the exact religious freedom that the Canadian government had promised them.
Meanwhile, Jewish populations in Europe were facing even darker horrors. A rising tide of violent anti-Semitism led to organized, deadly riots called pogroms. Jack Myers, a British Jewish man, witnessed this firsthand in Russia in 1905. He wrote, "The scene was indescribable. Shops and houses were plundered and destroyed, the schools were wrecked, men killed and wounded. Escaping that kind of daily terror was a massive push factor, ultimately bringing over 52,000 Jewish immigrants to Canada between 1901 and 1911.
This brings us to Section 5, the long journey west. Driven out by these intense push factors and lured in by Sifton's golden promises, millions committed to the arduous, multi-stage journey across the Atlantic to start over. But the reality of actually getting to the prairies, it was completely exhausting. We're talking weeks, sometimes months, of travel by crowded boats, then trains, then wagons. Just look at the faces in this photo of the first Doukhobors arriving at the port of Halifax in the freezing January of 1899. You can really see that mix of absolute exhaustion and cautious hope as they finally step foot in their new country.
But arriving at a port wasn't the end of the line. The final leg was a long train ride deep into the prairies. And out there, immigrants grappled with the profound psychological weight of their displacement. Peter Svarich, a Ukrainian immigrant, looked out his train window in 1900 and noted the endless flat prairies, no trees, no creeks. He wrote, "This is Canada, which draws us like a magnet. Did we do the right thing?" The sheer scale and absolute emptiness of the land was a massive shock to anyone used to European landscapes.
As we wrap up this explainer and reflect on the story behind this incredible demographic evolution, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought. Millions gave up everything, fleeing crushing poverty and violence, all drawn by these beautiful sunny posters of free farms for the million. But as they stood out there on that endless, freezing, treeless prairie, we have to ask, did the harsh reality of the Canadian frontier truly match the idyllic dream they were sold? It's a huge question, and one that really defines the complex legacy of Canada's great immigration boom. Thanks so much for watching.